The lobby of St. Jude's Medical Center fell into a silence so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. 1 minute, Sarah Jenkins was just an invisible, 50-year-old nurse cleaning up a spilled coffee mess, humiliated by her boss in front of a crowded waiting room. The next minute, the glass doors shattered inward. But it wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a terrorist attack. It was 6 men in full tactical gear, moving with the terrifying precision of apex predators. They didn't aim their rifles at the crowd. They marched straight past the trembling hospital administrator, stopped in front of the woman holding the mop, and dropped to one knee. When the leader spoke, his voice cracked with an emotion that soldiers aren't supposed to feel. He didn't call her nurse. He saluted and said 2 words that changed everything. "Commanding officer, ma'am." Rain lashed against the sliding glass doors of St. Jude's Medical Center in downtown Seattle, creating a blurry grey curtain that matched the exhaustion in Sarah Jenkins' bones. It was 6:45 p.m. Her 12-hour shift had officially ended 15 minutes ago, yet she was currently on her knees near the triage desk, wiping up a puddle of vomit that a flu patient had left behind. "Miss Jenkins, I don't pay you to stare at the floor. Put some elbow grease into it." The voice belonged to Dr. Gregory Sterling, the hospital's chief administrator. Sterling was a man who wore Italian suits under his white coat and treated the nursing staff like furniture, necessary, but easily replaced if it got scuffed. Sarah didn't look up. She kept her movements rhythmic and efficient. "Yes, Dr. Sterling. Maintenance is backed up on the 3rd floor. I'm handling it." "You're handling it because you're slow, Jenkins," Sterling sneered, checking his Rolex. He turned to a group of young interns standing nearby, using Sarah as a prop for his lecture. "Take note. This is what happens when you have no ambition. You end up 52 years old, changing bedpans and mopping floors, invisible to the world. Don't be a Jenkins." The interns offered awkward, sycophantic chuckles. Sarah paused for a fraction of a second. Her hand, gripping the paper towels, tightened enough to turn her knuckles white. In another life, a different version of her would have broken Dr. Sterling's wrist before he even processed the movement. But that woman, Captain Sarah Mitchell of the JSOS Medical Corps, call sign Valkyrie, was dead, buried deep under 2 decades of silence and a nondescript identity in the Pacific Northwest. "All done, Doctor," Sarah said, standing up. Her knees popped. She smoothed down her light blue scrubs, which were stained with iodine and coffee. She was a small woman, barely 5'4", with greying hair tied back in a messy bun. No one looked twice at her. That was the point. "Get out of my sight," Sterling dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "And Jenkins, if you're late tomorrow, don't bother coming in. I have a stack of resumes on my desk from nurses half your age who can actually move." Sarah walked toward the locker rooms, her head down. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. As she passed the security desk, old Barney, the night guard, gave her a sympathetic nod. "Rough day, Sarah?" Barney asked, chewing on a toothpick. "Same as always, Barney," she replied softly. "Just keeping my head down." "You let that peacock talk to you like dirt," Barney grumbled. "You're the best nurse in this unit. You caught that septic shock on the homeless guy in bed 4 when the residents missed it." "Lucky guess," Sarah murmured. She reached her locker, dialing the combination. 10-24-93, the date of the Battle of Mogadishu, a small reminder she allowed herself. She pulled out her worn tote bag and swapped her Crocs for cheap sneakers. She just wanted to go home to her small apartment, feed her cat, and stare at the wall until the memories stopped loud enough for her to sleep. But the universe had other plans. Just as she zipped her jacket, the hospital's overhead PA system crackled to life. It wasn't the standard chime for a code blue. It was a harsh, jarring siren that Sarah hadn't heard in years. Code Black, Trauma 1, Mass Casualty Protocol. All attending staff report to ER immediately. This is not a drill. Sarah froze. Code Black meant a bomb threat, active shooter, or a catastrophic influx of high-value trauma. "Jenkins!" Sterling's voice roared from the hallway. "Where do you think you're going? Get your ass back on the floor!" She closed her eyes, exhaling a breath she had been holding for 20 years. She could walk away. She should walk away. But the siren triggered a muscle memory that bypassed her conscious brain. Sarah dropped her bag and ran back toward the chaos. The emergency room was a scene of controlled panic. Stretchers were being wheeled in from the ambulance bay, flanked by men in black suits who were distinctly not paramedics. They wore earpieces and carried submachine guns concealed under tack vests. "Clear the hallway! Move!" one of the suited men screamed, shoving a bewildered resident out of the way. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her eyes scanning the situation. This wasn't a car pile-up. The blood on the gurneys was arterial, bright red and spurting. Gunshot wounds, high caliber. "We need a surgeon," the lead security agent yelled. He was massive, built like a tank, with a jagged scar running down his neck. "He's losing blood! Abdominal hit!" Dr. Sterling pushed through the crowd, trying to assert authority. "I am the chief administrator. You can't bring weapons in here." "Shut the hell up!" the agent roared, pointing a badge that Sarah recognized instantly. Diplomatic Security Service, or maybe CIA Special Activities. "Save him, or I burn this hospital to the ground." They wheeled the patient into Trauma Bay 1. He was a young man, barely 25, gasping for air. His chest was heaving, and blood was soaking through the field dressings at an alarming rate. Sterling looked at the wound and paled. It was a mess. "Get Dr. Halloway. I need a vascular surgeon." "Halloway is 20 minutes out," a nurse cried. "We don't have 20 minutes," Sarah whispered. She watched from the doorway. The young doctor in charge, an arrogant resident named Brad, was freezing up. "BP is dropping. 60/40. He's crashing." "Clamp the bleeder," Sterling shouted, but he made no move to do it himself. He was an administrator, not a trauma surgeon. Not anymore. I can't see the source," Brad stammered, his hands shaking deep inside the patient's open abdominal cavity. "There's too much blood." The monitor began to scream, a flat, singular tone. "Asystole." "He's coding." The security agent grabbed Dr. Sterling by the lapels. "Fix him!" Sterling was paralyzed. The patient was dying. The room was chaotic, loud and ineffective. It was the fog of war, and these civilians were drowning in it. Sarah didn't make a conscious decision. The switch flipped. The tired, middle-aged nurse vanished. Valkyrie stepped forward. She shoved past Dr. Sterling with enough force to knock him into a supply cart. "Gloves!" she barked. The authority in her voice was so absolute that the nurse next to her handed them over without thinking. "Jenkins, what the hell are you doing?" Sterling sputtered, regaining his balance. "Get away from that patient. You're a nurse." Sarah ignored him. She stepped up to the table, hip-checking the frozen resident out of the way. Her eyes locked onto the open cavity. Suction. Now. She didn't wait. She plunged her hands into the warm blood. She didn't look with her eyes. She looked with her fingers. She felt the tear in the descending aorta. It was a jagged rip, likely from a tumbling 7.62 round. "He has a tension pneumothorax on the left side," Sarah stated calmly, her voice cutting through the noise like a razor. "And a nicked aorta. Give me a vascular clamp. Curved." "You can't do that procedure," Sterling screamed. "Security, remove her." "Touch me, and he dies," Sarah said. She didn't look up. She looked directly at the lead agent with the scar. Tell your men to stand down. I've got the bleed." The agent looked at Sarah. He saw something in her eyes, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen hell and survived. He held up a hand to Sterling. "Let her work." "Clamp," Sarah repeated. A stunned nurse slapped the instrument into her hand. With a movement too fast for the others to track, Sarah reached in, navigated the mess of tissue blindly, and clamped the artery. The fountain of blood stopped instantly. "Suction," she ordered again. The field cleared. "BP is rising," the anesthesiologist called out, disbelief in his voice. 80 over 50. 90 over 60. Sinus rhythm is returning. Sarah didn't stop. "He needs a thoracostomy tube, left side. 36 French. Scalpel." I'll do it," the resident Brad stammered, trying to regain control. "No time," Sarah said. She took the scalpel. She located the fourth intercostal space on the patient's chest. Cut, spread, insert. A rush of air hissed out of the patient's chest, followed by blood draining into the collection chamber. The patient took a massive, gasping breath. "He's stable," Sarah announced. She peeled off her blood-soaked gloves and dropped them into the bin. The room was silent. Every doctor, nurse, and armed agent stared at the small, grey-haired woman in the dirty scrubs. Dr. Sterling's face was purple with rage and confusion. You practiced medicine without a license. You performed surgery. I'll have you arrested. I'll have your license stripped." Sarah looked at him, her eyes cold. "He's alive, isn't he? When Holloway gets here, tell him the aorta is clamped and he needs a Dacron graft. Don't touch it until he's scrubbed in." She turned to leave, her hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Wait," the lead agent said. He stepped in front of her, blocking the exit. He wasn't looking at her like a nurse anymore. He was looking at her like a puzzle. "That clamp. You did that blind. That's a combat technique. Field surgery." "I watch a lot of medical dramas," Sarah lied, her voice flat. "Excuse me. I have floors to mop." "What is your name?" the agent demanded. "Sarah Jenkins." The agent narrowed his eyes. He looked at the way she stood, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced, hands relaxed but ready. "Jenkins. Right." He tapped his earpiece. "Run a background check on a Sarah Jenkins, St. Jude's Hospital, priority 1. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She had to run. Now. Sarah hurried toward the staff exit, her mind racing. The background check would come back clean. Too clean. Sarah Jenkins was a ghost created by a spook in the Pentagon 20 years ago. But if they dug deeper, if they ran facial recognition against classified databases. She reached the rear exit doors, pushing the crash bar. It didn't budge. Click. The electronic locks had engaged. "Attention," the PA system announced. "The hospital is now under full lockdown. No one enters or leaves until the VIP is secured. Repeat, full lockdown." "Damn it," Sarah cursed under her breath. She turned back toward the service corridor. She needed to find a dead zone, somewhere without cameras, and wait this out. But as she rounded the corner near the pharmacy, she nearly collided with Dr. Sterling and 2 hospital security guards. "There she is!" Sterling shouted, pointing a shaking finger at her. "Grab her. I want her detained for police questioning. She assaulted a superior and performed illegal surgery." The guards, 2 burly men named Miller and Davis, who usually spent their shifts napping, looked hesitant. They liked Sarah. She often brought them donuts. "Dr. Sterling, maybe we just write her up," Miller suggested. "Arrest her!" Sterling shrieked. "She's a liability!" Before the guards could move, the lights in the corridor flickered and died. The emergency red backup lights bathed the hallway in a sinister glow. A low rumble shook the floor. Not an earthquake, an explosion. Far away, maybe the parking garage. What was that? Davis asked, reaching for his radio. Sarah knew exactly what it was. A breaching charge. The agent in the trauma room hadn't just brought a patient, he had brought a war. Whoever had shot that boy was coming to finish the job. "Get down!" Sarah yelled, tackling Sterling just as the windows at the end of the hallway shattered inward. Bullets chewed up the drywall where Sterling's head had been a second ago. Automatic fire echoed through the sterile corridor. "Active shooters!" Miller screamed, fumbling for his taser, useless against the assault rifles firing from the adjacent rooftop. Sarah rolled, dragging the hyperventilating Sterling behind a heavy concrete pillar. "Stay down and shut up," she hissed at him. You saved me," Sterling whimpered, his arrogance replaced by pure terror. "Don't read into it," she snapped. She peeked around the pillar. 3 men were rappelling down from the broken window. They wore tactical gear, but it was mismatched. No unit patches. Mercenaries. Cartel hit squad. They were moving toward the trauma unit. The VIP. They were here for the boy Sarah had just saved. Sarah looked at the 2 terrified security guards. "Miller, Davis, give me your radios and give me your belts." "What? Why?" "Because if those men get to Trauma 1, everyone in this hospital dies," Sarah said. Her voice dropped an octave, returning to the tone of command. "I need you to barricade the pharmacy door. Sterling, go with them." "What are you going to do?" Miller asked, handing over his heavy Maglite flashlight. Sarah weighed the flashlight in her hand. It wasn't a Sig Sauer, but it would have to do. "I'm going to take out the trash," she said. She slipped into the shadows of the ventilation access room. She knew the hospital schematics better than the architects. She had spent 5 years mopping every inch of these floors. She knew which vents connected, which doors squeaked, and where the blind spots were. The mercenaries were moving fast, but they were loud. They expected resistance from the agents, not from the cleaning lady. Sarah navigated the crawl space above the ceiling tiles. She could hear the mercenaries below her. "Target is in Trauma 1. Eliminate the guards. Kill the target. Extract." "What about civilians?" "No witnesses." Sarah's blood ran cold. No witnesses. She dropped down from a vent in the linen closet behind the lead mercenary. She didn't have a weapon, but she had a syringe of succinylcholine, a powerful paralytic that she had swiped from the crash cart during the chaos. She moved silently. The mercenary never heard her. She jammed the needle into the exposed skin of his neck, just above the collar of his vest, and depressed the plunger. He collapsed without a sound, his diaphragm paralyzed instantly. Sarah grabbed his falling rifle, a customized HK-416, and checked the chamber. Loaded, she slung the rifle. It felt heavy, familiar, and terrible. "1 down," she whispered. 2 to go. But as she stepped over the body, her radio crackled. It was the frequency the mercenaries were using. She had picked up the dead man's comms. "Team leader to Alpha, we have a problem. The perimeter is breached, but not by police." "Who is it?" "It's the Navy. Heavy hitters. Looks like DevGru. Gold Squadron." Sarah froze. Gold Squadron. Her old unit. If they were here, they weren't just here for the boy. They would recognize her. The moment they saw her face, the quiet life of Sarah Jenkins was over. But the mercenaries were still between the SEALs and the innocent staff. Sarah racked the bolt of the rifle. She had a choice: hide and stay invisible, or fight and be exposed. She heard a nurse scream down the hall. Choice made. Sarah Jenkins started running toward the gunfire. Smoke began to fill the sterile white hallways of the pediatrics wing, carrying the acrid scent of cordite and burning plastic. The mercenaries had split up. 2 were pinning down the DSS agents in Trauma 1, while the remaining 3 were sweeping the floors, eliminating any potential witnesses. Sarah Jenkins moved through the smoke like a wraith. She knew that the heavy oak doors of the pediatrics ward were fire-rated and sound-dampened, perfect for an ambush. She checked the magazine of the captured HK-416 rifle. 20 rounds left. Not enough for a prolonged firefight, but she didn't plan on fighting long. She planned on ending it. Ahead of her, a mercenary kicked open the door to the supply closet, where 3 nurses were huddling. "Please, no!" one of the nurses screamed. The mercenary raised his weapon, a cruel grin visible beneath his balaclava. Sarah didn't hesitate. She didn't shout a warning. She stepped out from behind a linen cart, raised the rifle to her shoulder, and fired 2 controlled shots. Thwip, thwip. The suppressed rounds struck the mercenary in the side plate of his body armor. He grunted, stumbling back but not falling. He spun around, raising his rifle toward her. "Target acquired! Female! Armed!" he yelled into his comms. Sarah dropped to a knee, sliding across the polished linoleum floor. As she slid, she adjusted her aim. Armor covered the chest, but the pelvic girdle was exposed. She fired again. The bullet shattered his hip. He went down, screaming. Sarah was on him before he hit the ground. She kicked the rifle away and drove the butt of her weapon into his temple. The screaming stopped. "2 down," she breathed. Her heart rate was barely elevated. It was terrifying how easily the old persona fit her, like a pair of well-worn boots. She grabbed the mercenary's radio. "We have a contact in PEDS," a voice crackled. "Flank her." Sarah looked at the 3 terrified nurses in the closet. One of them was young, an intern who had laughed at Dr. Sterling's jokes earlier that day. Now, she looked at Sarah with wide, trembling eyes. "Listen to me," Sarah said, her voice steel. "Lock this door. Do not open it for anyone unless you hear the code word, Nightingale. Do you understand?" The intern nodded frantically. Who are you?" "Just the janitor," Sarah said. She turned and ran. She needed to draw the fire away from the civilians. She sprinted toward the MRI suite. The powerful magnets in the machine were always on. If she could lure them in there. She reached the MRI control room just as bullets began chewing up the wall behind her. 2 mercenaries were pursuing her, moving with professional speed. "She's cornered in radiology," one shouted. Sarah smashed the glass of the control booth and hit the quench button, but then hesitated. No. Quenching the magnet would ruin the machine and cause a helium explosion. Too dangerous for the hospital structure. Instead, she grabbed a heavy oxygen tank from a transport gurney. She rolled the steel tank into the center of the MRI room hallway and waited. The mercenaries rounded the corner. "Drop the weapon!" Sarah didn't drop the weapon. She kicked the oxygen tank hard, sending it spinning into the room. Then she dove behind the lead-lined wall. The mercenaries, seeing the movement, fired. A bullet punctured the valve of the pressurized oxygen tank. The tank became a missile. It hissed violently, spinning wildly before launching itself like a torpedo. It slammed into the first mercenary, shattering his legs, then ricocheted off the wall and smashed into the MRI machine with a deafening clang. The magnetic field grabbed the steel tank and the mercenaries' weapons. The rifles were ripped from their hands, flying across the room and slamming against the bore of the magnet. The men were helpless, pinned against the wall by the magnetic pull on their gear. Sarah stepped out, her rifle held steady. It was made of non-magnetic composite and aluminum, a lucky break, but she kept her distance just in case. She didn't shoot them. She didn't have to. "Stay," she commanded. She turned back toward the trauma unit. The main fight was there. The DSS agent she had met earlier, the one with the scar, was losing. When Sarah arrived at the intersection leading to the ER, the scene was critical. The scarred agent was behind an overturned desk, bleeding from a shoulder wound. His partner was dead. The remaining mercenaries were setting up a breaching charge on the Trauma 1 door. Inside lay the VIP patient she had just operated on. Dr. Sterling was cowering behind a vending machine 50 feet away, holding his phone up, recording the scene with shaking hands. "You in the suit?" Sarah yelled at the agent. "Covering fire, now!" The agent looked up, saw the cleaning lady holding an assault rifle, and didn't even blink. He popped up and fired his last handgun magazine at the mercenaries. It bought Sarah 2 seconds. She didn't run for cover. She ran straight at the enemy. She fired as she moved, a technique known as shooting on the move, something that takes years to master. Her shots were surgical. One mercenary took a round to the throat. Another took one to the hand, holding the detonator. The explosion never happened. The remaining mercenaries turned their fire on her. A bullet grazed her arm, tearing through the scrub top and searing her skin. Sarah didn't flinch. She dove over a gurney, landing beside the wounded agent. "Nice of you to join the party," the agent groaned, clutching his shoulder. "Who the hell are you, lady? Because you sure as hell ain't changing bedpans for a living." "Focus," Sarah snapped. "How many hostiles left?" "Unknown. But we have a bigger problem," the agent said, pointing to the ceiling. "There's a chopper on the roof. They're trying to extract the target." "No," Sarah said, listening to the distinct thump, thump, thump of rotors above. "That's not an extraction chopper. That's a Black Hawk, MH-60. The agent's eyes widened. "Reinforcements?" "The cavalry," Sarah corrected. Suddenly, the skylight above the main atrium exploded inward. Ropes dropped. Flashbang grenades detonated with blinding white light and deafening bangs. "Breach! Breach! Breach!" The voice was amplified, terrifying, and distinctly American. Bodies in full tactical gear, multicam, quad-lens, panoramic night vision goggles, suppressed HK-400-16s, descended from the ceiling like avenging angels. The remaining mercenaries didn't stand a chance. The engagement lasted 3 seconds. Double taps, controlled bursts, silence. Sarah lowered her weapon. She leaned her head back against the cold metal of the gurney. It was over, or so she thought. The silence that followed the gunfire was heavy, broken only by the groans of the wounded mercenaries and the rhythmic dripping of water from the sprinkler system. Dr. Sterling, realizing the danger had passed, scrambled out from behind the vending machine. He smoothed his suit, his face flushed with a mix of adrenaline and indignation. "Thank God!" Sterling shouted, marching toward the center of the room, where 6 Navy SEALs were securing the area. "I am Dr. Gregory Sterling, the Chief Administrator. You need to arrest that woman immediately." He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah, who was still sitting on the floor, checking the dressing on the wounded DSS agent. "She stole a weapon. She endangered my staff. She's a maniac," Sterling ranted. "I have it all on video. She killed people." The lead SEAL, a massive figure whose face was obscured by a ballistic mask and night vision goggles, slowly turned his head toward Sterling. He didn't speak. He just stared. The sheer menace radiating from the soldier made Sterling take a step back. "Secure the room," the lead SEAL ordered. His voice was deep, gravelly, and distorted by his comms mask. 2 operators moved to check the mercenaries. One moved to the VIP patient's room. The lead SEAL walked toward Sarah. He moved with a predatory grace, his weapon lowered but ready. He stopped 5 feet away from her. Sarah stood up slowly. Her knees ached. Her arm was bleeding. She looked like a mess. A middle-aged woman in dirty scrubs, holding a rifle she shouldn't know how to use. The SEAL stared at her. He looked at the way she held the weapon, finger off the trigger, muzzle depressed. He looked at the knot in her shoelaces. A square knot with safeties, a habit specific to airborne units. He reached up and unclipped his helmet. He pulled off the ballistic mask. Underneath was a face hardened by war. A square jaw, a scar running through his eyebrow, and piercing blue eyes that were currently widening in disbelief. He was about 40 years old. Sarah's breath hitched. She recognized him. 20 years ago, he was just a kid, a 19-year-old Bud S dropout she had found bleeding out in a rice paddy in the Philippines during a joint operation gone wrong. She had carried him 4 miles to the extraction point. She had sewn his artery shut with fishing line. "Jackson," she whispered. Commander Jackson, Jax Miller, commanding officer of Devgru Gold Squadron, stared at the cleaning lady. His eyes welled up with tears. "Impossible," he breathed. "Valkyrie." The other SEALs froze. They turned to look. Valkyrie wasn't just a call sign. In the special operations community, it was a legend. The ghost doctor who saved operators when the world had left them for dead. The woman who was officially listed as KIA in a classified helicopter crash 2 decades ago. "I go by Sarah now," she said softly, her voice cracking. Jackson didn't care. He dropped his rifle. It clattered loudly on the hospital floor. To the shock of Dr. Sterling, the wounded DSS agent, and the gathering crowd of nurses and doctors, the commander of the Navy SEALs dropped to one knee. He bowed his head. "Commanding officer on deck!" Jackson barked, his voice breaking with emotion. Instantly, the 5 other SEALs, men who fear nothing, men who answer to almost no one, snapped to attention. They didn't salute her as a civilian. They didn't salute her as a nurse. They saluted her as a superior. "Mum," Jackson said, looking up at her with reverence. "We thought you were dead. We've been looking for you for 20 years. Dr. Sterling's jaw hit the floor. What is happening? She's a janitor. She mops the floors." Jackson stood up, his face hardening into granite as he looked at Sterling. He walked over to the administrator, towering over him. "This woman," Jackson growled, pointing at Sarah, "is Major Sarah Mitchell, Silver Star recipient, Navy Cross recipient, former lead surgeon for the Joint Special Operations Command. She has saved more lives in one day than you will save in your entire pathetic career." Sterling sputtered. But she didn't have a resume. She is a hero," Jackson cut him off. "And if you speak to her with anything less than absolute respect, I will have you detained for obstruction of a federal operation. Do I make myself clear?" Sterling nodded, pale and trembling, shrinking back into the crowd. Sarah felt the tears prickling her eyes. She had spent 20 years hiding, thinking she had been forgotten, thinking she was broken goods. Jackson turned back to her. "Mum, the VIP inside. It's Senator Thorne's son. The senator sent us. He told us if anyone could keep his boy alive in a war zone, it was the ghost of St. Jude's. He knew you were here. He kept your secret until today." Sarah let out a shaky laugh. Thorne always did have a big mouth. "We need to get you out of here," Jackson said gently. "The people who sent these mercs, they know you're alive now. You can't stay here. You're compromised." Sarah looked around the lobby. She saw Barney the security guard staring at her with wide eyes. She saw the interns whispering. She saw the mop bucket she had abandoned hours ago. "I suppose my shift is over anyway," Sarah said, wiping blood from her arm. "We have a bird on the roof," Jackson said. "We're taking the VIP, and we're taking you home." "I don't have a home, Jackson. Not anymore." "You do now," Jackson smiled. "The teams never leave their own behind." Sarah nodded. She handed the rifle to a young SEAL who looked at it like a holy relic because she had touched it. "Lead the way, Commander," she said. But as they turned to leave toward the elevators, the front doors of the hospital burst open again. This time it wasn't mercenaries, it wasn't SEALs, it was the press. Dozens of cameras, reporters, and news vans had descended on the hospital. The explosion and the gunfire had attracted the entire city's media. "There they are," a reporter shouted, spotting the seals surrounding the woman in scrubs. "Cameras off," Jackson ordered, shielding Sarah. But it was too late. The image was beamed live to millions of homes. The mystery nurse, standing amidst Navy SEALs, blood on her scrubs, a look of defiance on her face. Sarah stopped. She looked at the cameras. She realized that running wasn't an option anymore. The secret was out. Valkyrie had risen from the grave. "Wait," Sarah said, stopping Jackson. "Mom?" "If they're going to see me," Sarah said, straightening her back and lifting her chin, shedding the posture of the beaten-down nurse and assuming the stance of the officer she once was. "Let them see me standing tall." She walked forward, not behind the SEALs, but in front of them. And that was when the real trouble started. Because the man watching the news feed in a dark room halfway across the world wasn't Senator Thorne. It was the man who had tried to kill her 20 years ago. The man who gave her the nightmares. He picked up his phone. "She's alive," the man whispered. "Activate the sleepers. Burn Seattle to the ground if you have to. I want her head." Rain slashed diagonally across the armored windshield of the black SUV, distorting the flashing lights of the police escorts ahead. The convoy moved like a dark snake through the wet streets of Seattle, heading toward the private airfield at Boeing Field. Inside the lead vehicle, the atmosphere was a suffocating mix of tension and reverence. Sarah sat in the back, squeezed between Commander Jackson Miller and the medical equipment monitoring the stable, but unconscious. VIP, Leo Thorne. "You're staring," Sarah murmured, her eyes closed, her head resting against the bulletproof glass. Jackson shifted his weight, the creak of his tactical vest audible in the quiet cabin. "I'm just making sure you're actually here, Mom. For 20 years I visited an empty grave at Arlington. Seeing you, eating a protein bar in the back of a Chevy Suburban. It's a lot to process." Sarah opened one eye. The steel-grey iris was sharp, undimmed by age or exhaustion. "I had to disappear, Jax. Operation Blackbriar wasn't just a failure, it was a setup. Someone in the Pentagon sold us out. If I had come home, they would have killed me, and they would have killed the rest of the unit to cover their tracks. Being dead was the only way to keep you all alive." Jackson's jaw tightened. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. "You stayed in the shadows to protect us?" "That's the job," she said simply. "Commanders eat last. Commanders die first." "We're not kids anymore, Sarah," Jackson said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "We're Gold Squadron. If you had told us, we would have burned the world down to find the leak." "I know," Sarah softened. "That's exactly why I couldn't tell you. You would have started a war you couldn't win." Before Jackson could respond, the radio in the front seat crackled. It was the driver, a frantic DSS agent. "Commander, we have a vehicle approaching fast on the 6. No lights. Heavy truck." Jackson spun around, looking out the rear window. Through the rain, a massive semi-truck was barreling down the highway, pushing aside civilian cars like toys. It wasn't slowing down. "Ambush!" Jackson roared. "Evasive maneuvers! Get off the X!" The driver slammed on the accelerator. The SUV surged forward, the engine whining in protest. But they were on the West Seattle Bridge, a high-rise structure with nowhere to go but forward or down. "They're boxing us in!" Sarah shouted, her tactical instincts overriding her fatigue. She pointed ahead. Another truck had jackknifed across the lanes a quarter-mile up, blocking the exit. "It's a kill box!" Jackson cursed. He keyed his comms. "All units, dismount! Defensive perimeter! Protect the VIP!" The semi-truck behind them slammed into the rear escort vehicle, crushing it against the guardrail. The sound of screeching metal and shattering glass tore through the night. The convoy screeched to a halt. "Get out! Move!" Jackson kicked the door open, dragging Sarah out into the driving rain. Gunfire erupted instantly. It was coming from everywhere. The trucks, the support cables of the bridge, the shadows. These weren't the sloppy mercenaries from the hospital. These were professionals. The sleepers had awakened. Sarah crouched behind the engine block of the SUV, shielding the unconscious body of Leo Thorne as two SEALs dragged him to cover. Bullets sparked off the pavement inches from her boots. "We're pinned down!" a SEAL named Davis yelled, firing controlled bursts at the muzzle flashes in the distance. "They have the high ground on the bridge towers. Snipers!" Jackson was returning fire, but the situation was dire. They were exposed, outgunned, and trapped on a bridge 200 feet above the water. "We need air support," Jackson shouted into his radio. "Base, this is Gold Leader. Taking heavy fire, requesting immediate CAS." "Negative, Gold Leader," the radio crackled back, static washing out the voice. "Severe weather has grounded all assets. You are on your own for 20 mics." 20 minutes. They would be dead in 5. Sarah looked at the squad. These men were the best in the world, but they were reacting, not attacking. They were trying to protect her and the VIP, and that defensive posture was getting them killed. She saw the snipers glint on the tower. She saw the heavy machine gun being set up on the jackknifed truck ahead. She grabbed Jackson's shoulder, spinning him around. The younger man looked at her, rain dripping from his nose, fear for her safety evident in his eyes. "Give me your headset," Sarah ordered. "Mom, stay down." "Give me the damn headset, Commander. That is an order." The authority in her voice cut through the chaos. It was the voice that had commanded battalions. Jackson handed it over. Sarah put on the headset. She took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of rain and gunpowder. She wasn't Nurse Jenkins anymore. She wasn't even just Sarah. She was Valkyrie. "Gold Team, this is Valkyrie," she said calmly over the channel. "Listen to me. They expect you to turtle. They expect you to protect the package. We are going to disappoint them." The SEALs paused for a microsecond. Hearing that call sign, a ghost story come to life, sent a jolt of electricity through the team. "Davis, Miller," Sarah barked, reading the battlefield with terrifying clarity. "Pop smoke on the left flank. Blind the sniper. Rodriguez, take the AT-4 rocket from the trunk. I want that truck on the north end gone. Jackson, on me. We're going up the middle." "Up the middle?" Jackson looked at her like she was insane. "That's a suicide run." "No," Sarah smiled, a cold, dangerous smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's a distraction. While you draw their fire, I'm going to make a house call." She pointed to the maintenance walkway running underneath the bridge deck. "Cover me." Sarah didn't wait. She vaulted over the guardrail, disappearing into the darkness of the drop, catching the maintenance ladder with one hand. Jackson watched her go, his heart hammering. He turned to his men, his face set in grim determination. "You heard the lady!" Jackson screamed, raising his rifle. "Push! Violence of action! Give them hell!" The wind under the bridge was ferocious, threatening to tear Sarah from the rusted metal grating of the maintenance walkway. Below her, the black water of the Puget Sound churned. Above her, the battle raged, the sound of gunfire muffled by the concrete deck. Sarah moved fast. She could see the boots of the attackers through the grate above. She counted 12 hostiles. They were focused on the SEALs, convinced they had the Americans pinned. She reached the section directly beneath the jackknifed truck where the heavy machine gun was suppressing her team. She could see the fuel tank of the truck leaking diesel through a crack in the concrete. She didn't have explosives. She didn't have a grenade. But she had the medical kit she had grabbed from the SUV. She pulled out a flare, roadside emergency equipment. "Sterilize the wound," she whispered to herself. She lit the flare. The red phosphorus hissed, blindingly bright in the darkness. She tossed it through the gap in the concrete, straight into the pooling diesel fuel. Boom! The explosion was massive. The fuel tank ignited, turning the truck into a fireball. The shockwave knocked the machine gun nest into the air. The attackers screamed as the flames engulfed their position. Up on the deck, the tide turned instantly. "Target destroyed," Jackson yelled. "Push forward." The SEALs, seeing the fiery destruction of their main obstacle, surged forward with the ferocity of wolves. Without the heavy gun pinning them down, the remaining attackers were easy pickings for the operators. Sarah climbed back up the ladder, pulling herself onto the roadway just as the last hostile fell. She stood up, covered in grease, soot, and rain. The fire from the burning truck illuminated her silhouette against the storm. Jackson ran to her, checking her for wounds. "Are you crazy? You could have been blown off the bridge." "I calculated the blast radius," Sarah said, breathless but steady. "I had a 3% margin of error." "And if you were wrong? Then I wouldn't have to worry about my retirement plan," she quipped. Before Jackson could scold her, a slow clapping sound emerged from the darkness behind the burning wreckage. A man stepped out. He was wearing a bespoke suit, completely out of place in the war zone. He held a pistol to the head of a terrified hostage, Dr. Gregory Sterling, who had apparently been following the convoy in his own car, desperate to be part of the event. "Bravo," the man said. His accent was American, cultured, and chillingly familiar. "Valkyrie, you really are hard to kill." Sarah froze. She knew that voice. "Director Vance," she spat. "I should have known." Robert Vance, the Deputy Director of Operations, the man who had sent her unit to die 20 years ago. He was the leak. "You have caused me a lot of trouble, Sarah," Vance sighed, pressing the gun into Sterling's temple. Sterling was sobbing, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "I built an empire on the ruins of your unit. Private military contracts, off-book weapons, and now you pop up on the news, threatening to undo it all." "Let him go, Vance," Sarah said, stepping forward. "He's a civilian. He's nobody." "He's leverage," Vance smiled. "Drop your weapons, all of you, or the good doctor gets a closed casket funeral." Jackson and the SEALs hesitated. They had clear shots, but Vance was using Sterling as a human shield. "Do it!" Vance screamed. "Drop them!" Jackson slowly lowered his rifle. The other SEALs followed suit. Sarah looked at Vance. She looked at the gun. She looked at Sterling, the man who had humiliated her, belittled her, and treated her like dirt for 5 years. "Please," Sterling whimpered, looking at Sarah. "Sarah, please." Sarah didn't look at Sterling with contempt. She looked at him with pity. "Vance," Sarah said softly, "you forgot one thing about me." "And what's that?" "I'm a medic," she said. "I know exactly where the vital organs are." Sarah didn't lunge at Vance. She didn't shoot. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out the only weapon she had left, a pen light. She clicked it on, flashing the high-intensity strobe directly into Vance's eyes. It was a small distraction, barely a fraction of a second, but for a man like Jackson Miller, it was an eternity. Crack. Jackson didn't need to be told. The moment Vance flinched, blindingly blinking away the strobe, Jackson fired a single shot from his hip. The bullet struck Vance in the right shoulder, the weapon arm. He screamed, dropping the gun. Sterling scrambled away on his hands and knees, wetting his pants in the process. Sarah was moving before Vance hit the ground. She kicked his pistol away and pinned him to the asphalt, her knee on his chest. "It's over, Robert," she whispered. Vance looked up at her, pain and hatred in his eyes. "You can't kill me. I'm the director. I have secrets that will bury this country." "I'm not going to kill you," Sarah said, standing up. She signaled to the DSS agents who were rushing up the bridge. "I'm going to let you live. in a supermax cell, for the rest of your very long, very miserable life. As the agents handcuffed Vance and dragged him away, silence finally fell over the bridge. The rain began to lighten. Dr. Sterling sat on the wet pavement, shivering. He looked up at Sarah, the woman he had called lazy, the woman he had tried to fire. "You," Sterling stammered. "You saved me. After everything I said." Sarah looked down at him. She didn't demand an apology. She didn't gloat. "That's the difference between us, Gregory," she said quietly. "You treat people based on what they can do for you. I treat people because they are human beings." She turned her back on him. "Get him a blanket," she told a medic. "He's in shock." 3 days later. The sun was shining over the naval station Coronado. The ceremony was supposed to be private, but the leaked footage from the hospital had made that impossible. The stands were packed. Sarah stood on the podium, wearing a dress uniform that had been hurriedly tailored for her. It felt strange after years of scrubs. The Secretary of Defense stood at the microphone. For acts of conspicuous gallantry, for courage above and beyond the call of duty, and for 20 years of silent sacrifice. He pinned the Navy Cross onto her lapel. It was her second one. The crowd erupted. But Sarah didn't look at the crowd. She looked at the front row. Gold Squadron was there. Jackson Miller stood in the center. When the applause died down, Jackson stepped forward. He wasn't in formation. He walked right up to the podium, breaking protocol. He extended his hand. Sarah took it. "So," Jackson smiled, his eyes crinkling. "The Navy has offered to reinstate your commission. Admiral Jenkins has a nice ring to it." Sarah laughed, the sound light and free. "I think I'm done giving orders, Jax. I missed 20 years of life. I think I'd like to try living it." "What will you do?" "I don't know," she said, looking out at the ocean. "Maybe travel. Maybe just sleep in past 5 a.m. "Well," Jackson said, his voice lowering, becoming intimate. "If you ever need a guide, or a heavy lifter, I've got a lot of leave saved up." Sarah looked at him. The boy she had saved was a man now. A good man. "I might take you up on that, Commander," she smiled. Jackson stepped back. He snapped his heels together. "Company!" Jackson barked. "Present! Arms!" 50 Navy SEALs, the Secretary of Defense, the rescued senator's son, even old Barney the security guard, who had been flown in for the event. They all saluted. Sarah Jenkins, the nurse, the ghost, the Valkyrie, stood tall. She wasn't invisible anymore. She raised her hand and returned the salute. "Carry on," she whispered. And for the first time in a very long time, Sarah was finally home. They thought she was just a janitor. They thought she was weak. But true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sarah Jenkins proved that heroes walk among us, disguised in simple scrubs and worn-out shoes, waiting for the moment when the world needs them most. Dr. Sterling learned the hard way that you should never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book is a retired special ops legend. What a ride! I still can't believe the look on Dr. Sterling's face when the SEAL commander called her Mom. That was pure justice. If you enjoyed Sarah's journey from the trauma ward to the battlefield, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about hidden heroes and shocking reveals, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. What did you think of the ending? Should Sarah join the Navy again or travel the world with Jackson? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.